On March 10, 2026, day 11 of the U.S.-Israel air campaign against Iran, two of the most senior American diplomatic figures in the Middle East were scheduled to board a plane to Tel Aviv. Steve Witkoff, Trump's special Middle East envoy, and Jared Kushner, presidential advisor and architect of the Abraham Accords, had a direct, high-level meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on the calendar. The visit was canceled. Tal 12, Israel broke the story. The Jerusalem Post confirmed it independently. No official explanation was offered by either government. No rescheduled date was announced. That combination, two senior officials, a confirmed cancellation, and total silence about the reason is not a scheduling anomaly in the middle of an active war. It is a signal. And to understand what it signals, you have to understand what was already documented between Washington and Tel Aviv in the days before those flights were called off. 4 days before the cancellation, on approximately March 6th, the Jerusalem Post published a report that had received far less attention than its contents warranted. Its officials told the Post they were caught completely off guard by the scope of Israeli strikes on Iranian oil infrastructure. Israel had communicated to the United States that oil production facilities would be targeted. What Israel did not disclose in advance was the scale of those strikes. When Brent crude crossed $120 per barrel in the days following those operations, American officials described themselves as blindsided, not by the targeting category, but by the extent of it. The economic consequence was direct. Oil prices had been trading near $60 per barrel before the conflict began. The crossing of $120 per barrel triggered immediate institutional alarm across Washington's economic agencies. Goldman Sachs told clients that if oil price gains held, as consumer price inflation could move from 2.4% in January 2026 toward 3% by year-end, eliminating prior forecasts for inflation to reach the Federal Reserve's 2% target. When McKinsey stated that $150 oil was possible if disruption persisted, IRGC. Capital markets described the situation as the most significant energy disruption since the 1970s Arab oil embargo. Its former White House energy advisor, Bob McNally, stated plainly that a prolonged Strait of Hormuz closure would constitute a guaranteed global recession. Washington had committed publicly to energy dominance and lower consumer costs as a governing platform. An oil price at $120 and climbing is incompatible with that commitment in any political time frame. The reported U.S. reaction was documented as furious. The reported Israeli response was documented as defiant. That exchange, furious on one side, defiant on the other, is the confirmed backdrop against which Witkoff and Kushner's visit was first scheduled and then canceled. Steve Witkoff's role in this administration's Middle East engagement requires precise description because it is central to understanding what the cancellation means. Witkoff served as the primary American backchannel in Gaza ceasefire negotiations. He was involved in the indirect U.S.-Iran talks conducted through Omani mediators before Operation Epic Fury began. He was present in Geneva when the most direct U.S.-Iran nuclear talks in years took place on February 26, talks that, according to Axios, citing a senior U.S. official, were described internally as positive, even as Iranian Foreign Minister IRGC publicly called them very intense and serious. Witkoff does not make symbolic visits. Every engagement he has made in this region during this administration has been tied to a specific negotiating objective. When Witkoff travels to a conflict zone, there is a reason grounded in operational diplomacy. When Witkoff cancels a trip to a conflict zone mid-war with no explanation, there is also a reason. The same logic applies to Jared Kushner. Kushner's involvement in the Abraham Accords, the 2020 framework that normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states, is the foundational document of the regional diplomatic architecture. This conflict is now straining. Both men have traveled to Israel during active conflicts before this one. Neither has canceled a visit of this type before now. The absence of a stated reason is itself information. In diplomatic practice, when a high-level visit is canceled due to a genuine logistical conflict, governments say so. When it is canceled due to a substantive disagreement, governments go quiet. The U.S. and Israeli governments went quiet. On March 2nd, day 3 of the conflict, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued a formal military statement. The IRGC announced that Kibar-Shikan ballistic missiles had been fired at 2 specific addresses inside Israel. The first stated target was the official office of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The second stated target was the private residence of Israeli Air Force Commander Tomer Bar. The IRGC characterized both as targeted precision operations. The statement then added a phrase that produced an immediate global information effect. Netanyahu's fate is unclear. Israel's Prime Minister's office responded the same day. The response was categorical. The claims were fake news. The statement contained no additional detail, no time-stamped footage, no live press conference from a confirmed location. That response, short and unelaborated, was issued within a media environment that significantly limits what can be confirmed independently. Israel has operated under strict wartime media restrictions since February 28th. International press access to strike zones inside Israel is legally restricted. Damage to Israeli military and leadership infrastructure is subject to official clearance before publication. TF. Casualty figures are not independently verifiable through standard journalistic access during the current operational period. Those restrictions are legally legitimate wartime security measures. They are also the conditions under which Iran's information operation functioned. Netanyahu did visit the Beit Shemesh missile shelter site on March 6, according to Israeli media reporting. His office published written statements on March 7th. By March 10th, his office confirmed publicly that he was alive, and subsequent verified appearances closed the immediate uncertainty. Netanyahu is alive. That is confirmed. But the IRGC statement was not designed to be true. It was designed to create a question that the Israeli government's own media restrictions made temporarily difficult to fully close. In information warfare, creating a question is often sufficient. The answer matters less than the days the question remained open. That window between March 2nd and the confirmations that followed was long enough to generate substantial international coverage and to introduce uncertainty into the global narrative about who was operationally in charge on the Israeli side. The structural divergence between what Washington and Tel Aviv each stated as their objectives entering this conflict is documented in public record. The Trump administration's stated rationale for Operation Epic Fury is communicated through official White House channels and subsequent statements, centered on 3 objectives: permanently eliminating Iran's nuclear weapons program, degrading Iran's ballistic missile infrastructure, and the description later attributed to intelligence officials speaking to The Intercept, creating conditions for political transformation inside Iran following the elimination of Supreme Leader Khamenei. That third objective assumed a sequence: leadership elimination, followed by internal political fracture, followed by a new governing arrangement less hostile to regional stability. The sequence did not unfold as planned. Witkoff Khamenei was named the new supreme leader. Iran's security apparatus remained operationally coherent through the leadership transition. IRGC ballistic missile launch rates were reported by U.S. Central Command to be down 86% by March 3rd. But the IRGC continued daily operations across the region. Iran's acting deputy head, Mohammad Mokhber, told Iranian state media on March 4th that Iran had no intention of negotiating with the United States and considered the war sustainable over time. By day 11, Washington's publicly stated framing had shifted from victory to a formula that could produce a defined endpoint. Trump told the Times of Israel that the decision on ending the war would be made with Netanyahu as input. That phrasing, input, not agreement, not joint decision, reflects the distance between the two governments' current positions more precisely than any diplomatic statement. Israel's publicly observable operational behavior tells a different story from Washington's exit framing. Israeli strikes on Iranian oil infrastructure at a scale that surprised American officials is not consistent with the government that has received or is seeking a green light for the de-escalation. The confirmed public disagreement reported by the Jerusalem Post over the scope of those oil strikes is the first documented instance in this conflict of a specific operational decision by Israel that produced a documented negative reaction from Washington. It is not the kind of disagreement that gets resolved by phone call. It is the kind of disagreement that produces a canceled flight. The Gulf states' confirmed position during this conflict provides a structural framework for understanding why Washington's timeline pressure is real and not manufactured. Qatar, which hosts Al Udeid Air Base, the forward headquarters of U.S. Central Command, and the largest American military installation in the Middle East, explicitly communicated to Washington before Operation Epic Fury that it did not want its territory used for offensive operations against Iran. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates all registered formal or informal opposition to the strike operation in the days leading up to February 28th, according to reporting from multiple outlets tracking Gulf diplomatic communications. The UAE officially declared that its territory would not be used as a platform for attacks on Iran. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer denied a Trump administration request to use UK bases as launch platforms. France positioned naval assets toward the Mediterranean, but has kept participation strictly limited to defensive operations in its public characterizations. Iran has struck Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and the UAE with ballistic missiles and drones since the conflict began. Qatar confirmed 3 separate waves of incoming Iranian missiles in the opening days. Qatar Energy halted LNG production at Ras Laffan and Masad. On March 2nd, Qatar supplies approximately 22% of globally traded LNG. Bahrain's refinery operations were disrupted. Kuwait reported damage to oil-field infrastructure. These are governments that told Washington they did not want this war and are now absorbing direct strikes on their energy infrastructure, canned civilian environments because American military assets operate from their territory. Qatar's energy minister Al-Khaba warned publicly on March 6 that if the war continued, Gulf producers might be forced to halt exports and declare force majeure, describing potential consequences in terms of economies collapsing. That statement came from a government that hosts CENTCOM headquarters. It is not the statement of a government that is indefinitely prepared to sustain the current arrangement. The operational question this creates is specific and structural. Every American strike in this conflict has been launched from bases that require the ongoing consent of governments whose domestic political tolerance for this war is narrowing. That timeline constraint, not a military one, but a political and economic one, is the primary factor shaping Washington's urgency around a defined exit. It is the urgency that produced Witkoff's scheduled visit. It is the urgency that, against the backdrop of confirmed disagreement over Israeli oil strikes, produced the cancellation. Iran's ceasefire position, as publicly stated through official Iranian channels, has remained internally consistent across the 11 days of this conflict. Iran has communicated through statements by IRGC officials and Iranian government spokespersons that it will cease strikes on Gulf states' territory if those states stop permitting their territory to be used for offensive operations against Iran. Iran has not included Israel in that offer. Iran has not communicated a willingness to halt operations against U.S. forces as long as U.S. forces are actively striking Iranian territory. The gap between what Iran has publicly stated it will accept and what both the United States and Israel have publicly stated they require is the exact gap that a Witkoff-Kushner visit to Tel Aviv was positioned to address. The visit that was scheduled was not a ceremonial engagement. Based on Witkoff's established operational role across every major diplomatic contact point in this administration's Middle East engagement, Okay. The visit's purpose was almost certainly to work toward a formula, a defined endpoint that Washington could call a success, that Israel could accept, and that could be communicated to Gulf governments as a reason to hold their position a while longer. The visit being canceled means that formula has not yet been agreed between Washington and Tel Aviv. That is not speculation. It is the direct implication of a confirmed cancellation. It's a confirmed disagreement on oil strikes. In the absence of any public statement of alignment between the two governments on what the end of this conflict looks like, Human Rights Watch opened a formal war crimes investigation into a strike that killed over 170 children at a school, according to HRW's official statement. That investigation adds international legal pressure to the alliance's already stressed diplomatic position. The Arab League has condemned Israeli operations. The United Nations General Assembly has passed multiple resolutions, though non-binding, calling for ceasefire. None of this shifts the military equation immediately, but all of it narrows the political window inside which a sustainable outcome can be constructed. The confirmed picture on March 10, 2026, day 11. Militarily, CENTCOM reported Iran's ballistic missile launch rate down 86% from day 1, with approximately 300 launches confirmed destroyed. Iran has fired more than 500 ballistic missiles and launched over 2,000 drones across 11 days of operations. Iran's IRGC has publicly stated its fighting capacity extends a minimum of 6 months. Economically, Brent crude has crossed $120 per barrel following confirmed Israeli strikes on Iranian oil infrastructure at a scale that American officials described to the Jerusalem Post as not having been disclosed in advance. Qatar Energy has halted Ras Laffan LNG production. European natural gas prices doubled within 72 hours of that halt. The Federal Reserve faces simultaneous pressure from an oil price shock, pre-existing inflation above its 2% target, and a leadership transition at the chair level. Diplomatically, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner canceled a scheduled high-level visit to Israel on March 10th with no stated reason and no rescheduled date. The Jerusalem Post confirmed a documented U.S.-Israel disagreement over the scope of Israeli strikes on Iranian oil infrastructure. Gulf states that were not party to the decision to launch Operation Epic Fury are absorbing direct strikes on their energy infrastructure and civilian environments. Iran's publicly stated ceasefire conditions exclude Israel entirely. The confirmed gap on March 10th. Iran will not stop striking Israel. Israel is not operating on Washington's timeline. Washington needs a formula before Gulf political tolerance exhausts. Those 3 facts, all confirmed in the public record, define the actual state of the alliance on day 11. The cancellation of a flight is, by itself, a small data point in the specific context of who canceled it, what they were going to discuss, and what the confirmed background of documented disagreement looks like. It is the most precise public signal available about the state of the U.S.-Israel relationship at this moment in the conflict. No government has publicly acknowledged a rupture. No government has stated that the alliance is in crisis. But governments do not announce fractures. They cancel flights. And then they go quiet.